Most people remember the roar of the freight train and the thrill of waving. What is often forgotten is the man at the very end who, with a simple gesture from a battered red caboose, acknowledged every child along the tracks. His daily vigilance was not for show or routine. Before machines and sensors, safety rode on his constant watch. What drove this ritual of connection, and why did it quietly vanish, taking part of our shared memory with it? A train passing through a small town always drew a crowd, even if that crowd was just a handful of kids perched on bikes or pressed up against a backyard fence. The rumble would build, pulling dust from the gravel and setting window panes humming. As the cars clattered by, each one seemed more anonymous than the last, until the final red caboose came into view, trailing behind like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. Children would stand ready, arms in the air, waving with all the hope that someone might notice. Most days, someone did. On the rear platform, a man in faded denim and a battered cap would lift his hand in reply. The gesture was unscripted, never required in any rule book. It was a small, unspoken agreement between the train and the world it passed through. You wave, I wave back. There are no ledgers that record these moments, no official photographs that catch the exact instant a child's excitement met the steady recognition from the caboose. What survives is memory, 1,000 local stories, each with its own details but always the same core. The man at the back who never failed to respond. Some remember him as a fixture, as much a part of the landscape as the tracks themselves. Others recall the brief eye contact, the way a tired face could break into a grin, or the simple comfort of being seen by someone whose world was always moving. The wave became a kind of folklore, passed down in family stories and community lore. It was never about ceremony or spectacle. It was about acknowledgement, a reminder that even in the midst of industry and noise, something human remained. The man on the rear platform was not a celebrity, not even a name most could recall. He was a symbol of connection, a living answer to the question every child asked with an outstretched hand. Does anyone notice me? For a moment, the answer was always yes. Long after the train disappeared down the line, the memory of that wave lingered. It was a brief interruption in the steady march of freight and time. But for those who waited by the tracks, it was enough. A simple gesture, repeated day after day, turned into something larger. A ritual that belonged to everyone who ever stood by the rails and hoped to be seen. Inside the caboose, space was tight and every inch mattered. A narrow desk hugged the wall, its surface scattered with consist sheets, waybills, and accident reports, evidence of the conductor's steady hand and endless paperwork. The desk's raised edge kept pencils and forms from sliding off as the car rocked over the rails, while drawers stuck just enough to show their age. Above, a lantern hung from a bracket, its glass clouded by coal smoke and years of use. Lanterns and coffee pots were always chained or strapped down, necessary in a world where anything loose could be lost to the constant sway. Bunks lined the wall, bolted tight, barely long enough for a grown man. Mattresses were thin, often patched, covered in wool blankets that smelled of canvas and sweat. Lockers filled the corners, their dented doors holding tools, gloves, boots, and sometimes a battered lunch pail. Even the graffiti carved into wood or a calendar above a bunk served a purpose. Purpose, reminders of time and place in a life that never paused. Nothing was for show, everything had a job. At the center, a small stove stood guard against the cold. Its metal sides bore the scars of winters spent fighting frost that crept through every seam. Coal or oil burned inside, the stove clattering with each jolt, warmth pooling unevenly so one side of the car sweltered while the other stayed cold enough to see your breath. Someone always kept watch on the fire, feeding it just enough to keep the chill at bay, careful not to let smoke back up and fill the air. Above, the cupola rose like a lookout, its narrow seats facing both directions. From here, the conductor or rear brakeman scanned the train for trouble, watching for smoke from a hotbox or sparks where metal scraped metal. Boots thudded on the steel ladder as someone climbed up for another round of vigilance. The windows rattled, and the sound of steel wheels on rail joints filled the air, a rhythm that never faded. Work never truly stopped. Even at rest, the caboose vibrated with the force of locomotives ahead. Every object was secured, every movement practiced. Safety depended on human judgment, eyes sharp for danger, hands ready, minds always alert. By the late 1970s, the railroad industry began replacing the familiar caboose with a new generation of technology. End-of-train devices, known as EOT and FRED, appeared first in field trials around 1977. These compact units clamped onto the last coupler, carrying a flashing red light, a radio transmitter, and sensors that monitored brake pipe pressure and train movement. Instead of a crew member watching from the cupola, data now traveled instantly to the engineer's cab. Trackside, hotbox detectors waited, infrared sensors mounted beside the rails, scanning every passing axle for heat that signaled a failing bearing. When a problem was found, an automated voice or coded message alerted the crew by radio, sometimes before smoke or sparks were visible to the naked eye. Wheel impact detectors, installed along main lines, measured the force of each wheel as it struck the rails, flagging flats or defects that could grow into derailments. Railroad companies argued these systems offered more reliable safety at a fraction of the cost. End-of-train devices required no rest, no pay, and no shelter from the weather. Maintenance crews swapped out batteries and checked radio links, but the days of heating a caboose stove or bunking in a rolling office were ending. Unions, especially the United Transportation Union, fought to keep cabooses, insisting that no machine could match a human's quick judgment or intuition. Legal battles unfolded state by state. In Texas, for example, a law requiring cabooses on certain trains stood until the early 1980s, when federal courts and the Federal Railroad Administration sided with the railroads, citing national safety standards and the proven success of end-of-train technology. By 1985, most laws requiring full crews and cabooses had been repealed or overridden. What began as a series of technical upgrades quietly erased a job that had once seemed inseparable from the railroad's identity. The shift was not sudden, but by the time it was complete, the man at the back had vanished from the end of the line. Freight trains today stretch farther than ever, rolling past crossings with only a faint flash at the end, a small battery-powered device clipped to the last coupler, pulsing red in the dusk. There is no platform, no face behind glass, no hand raised in reply. The end of the train has become anonymous, defined by a blinking light and a stream of data reaching the engineer's cab. For most, the passing is just another moment swallowed by noise and motion. The place where a man once stood, watching for trouble and answering a child's wave, is now empty. Yet not every trace has faded. In quiet corners of railroad museums, preserved cabooses hold on to their stories. The paint is chipped, the bunks still narrow, the desk cluttered with yellowed forms and stubby pencils. Cupola seats bear the marks of 1,000 shifts, and the stove's metal is worn smooth from winters spent fighting the cold. Some cars display graffiti carved by restless hands, names, dates, a quick joke scratched into wood. In these spaces, the air still carries the memory of coal smoke, coffee, and sweat. The atmosphere feels preserved. Visitors step inside and find the world as it was, cramped, practical, always in motion. Curators point out patched cushions, improvised hooks, and battered lunch pails left behind. Every detail is a reminder that someone lived and worked here, mile after mile. The caboose, once a fixture on the rails, now survives as an artifact, Part office, part shelter, part lookout, and always, in some way, a witness. For those who remember waiting by the tracks, the loss is more than a missing car. It is the quiet absence at the end of the train, the space where a wave should be. Museums keep these memories alive, but out on the main line, the connection is gone. Only the blinking device remains, marking the end of something that once felt personal and real. Today, freight trains stretch longer and run faster, but no device returns a wave. As automation deepens, small acts of human connection quietly vanish. What we choose to remember shapes what remains. Some gestures, simple, wordless, shared, still ask to be seen. If this resonates, join the conversation and subscribe to help keep these memories alive.